Sound Off program. My name is Linda Kirker. I host the show, and thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. I'm really excited about something. At the end of this month, there's going to be a Liberty Camp for students who are in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. And beside me is the sample flyer that I've been putting around town. I just spoke with someone who is working on the curriculum, the program that the students are going to be learning and having fun doing it. They're going to portray, they're each going to represent one of the colonies, and they're going to argue back and forth about various parts of the Constitution, and it's just going to be, they're going to see a video, they're going to have a game, it's going to be a lot of fun, and they're going to learn about the founding of our country, their country, which every child needs to know and understand. So if you know of a child who's in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade that you would like to have come to the Liberty Camp, it's on July 30th, 31st, and August 1st, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, at the Church of the Rock in St. Albans from 9 to 11:30 each of those 3 mornings. And you can call me to register your child. My number is 527-7220. 527-7220. And let's get our young people into this camp. It's going to be great for them and for our country as well. Okay, with that, before I introduce my guest, is a good friend and who's going to sound off with me tonight, no pun intended, our U.S. Constitution and our constitutional republic. Our Constitution is the rule book for ordering of political society, limiting the federal government in its reach and authority, and empowering the people and the states. The Constitution is the anchor of our nation and the foundation of our nation's sovereignty and the strength of its people. With its faults, our nation has a proud history of accomplishment and success beyond the founders' wildest dreams. We need to teach our children to be proud of their country and to know that they are citizens of the United States of America, a nation that millions of people around the world want to enter to gain the freedom and the opportunities that we Americans often take for granted, perhaps at our own peril. Abraham Lincoln said, "The philosophy of the classroom today will be the philosophy of government tomorrow." It is up to us to ensure that our youth, your children and grandchildren, are well educated on the history of this unique nation among nations. Understanding the foundation of a republic is vital to protecting it. It requires respect for the rule of law. Individuals must speak up for their constitutional rights to protect themselves. Okay, that's it from me. Now I'm going to introduce my guest, Kay Trudell. Kay has been on the program before, but not for a while. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's good to have you here. You being a snowbird, I don't get to get you here too many times, but I love it when you come on the show. What are your thoughts, Kay, about our youth and the founding of our country? Wherever you would like to start. Wherever you'd like to start.
Well, the first thing I would actually like to do is state that I just read that the first instance that historians have found where the word freedom is actually mentioned politically was on a clay tablet in Samaria 3,500 years BC.
No kidding.
So the concept of freedom is old, really old, and it's built into the hearts of humans regardless of what system of government they live under. And the Constitution and the Declaration talk about inalienable rights, and that means that we have rights as human beings, no matter our culture, no matter our skin color, no matter what kind of government we live under, that pre-exist government. They're inalienable. That means that the rights of free people, whether they're under a free government or not, pre-exist government and are built in, they're hardwired into the human soul.
Yes, Kay, and well said. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how freedom is like, it's the, what I want to say, it's the center of a person's universe in terms of your life. You know, what you think, what you do, what your goals are, you know, how you achieve them. You have freedom to do that. At least in this country, you do. In many countries, people are not so fortunate. Government becomes so overbearing and controlling that people have no opportunities at all. And that is why it's so important for us to understand what was laid out for us in our Constitution to protect those rights and to give us the opportunities to become whatever we can visualize that we would like to be. I mean, that's a door that's open to all of us if it isn't stifled by some entity, government or parents who don't set an example, or, I mean, all kinds of things.
I would also like to add to that there is actually a difference between freedom and liberty. And what freedom is, everybody pretty much knows what that is. Liberty is freedom plus God. There is a difference. You can have freedom without God, but true liberty needs a belief in, as far as I know, the Judeo-Christian concept of God. That is true liberty.
Okay.
And you can, and I have done readings on that. That's not my idea. Those are documents that I have read and researched. Now, people today, including myself probably, say liberty and freedom interchangeably. We pretty much do, but there really is a kind of a slight difference. Liberty is freedom plus God.
Okay. I hadn't heard that
Yeah,
before.
oh yeah. Anyway, that's just, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
Not an original idea though, I have to.
Okay. Well,
Our founding fathers talked about liberty a lot.
they did.
Actually, even more than freedom if you think about it.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's what they meant. And our Constitution is based on Judeo-Christian principles and cultural values.
And a huge number of the signers
Yes.
of the Constitution were Christians.
Yes. There are 56, as I recall, 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence and 39 signers of the Constitution, and all but 4, I could be wrong, and I would stand to be corrected if I am, but from what I've read and remembered, all but 4 were practicing Christians, either Catholic or Protestant. There were 3 deists and a Unitarian, but I would point out to people that at least back in the 1700s, deists and Unitarians were not atheists. They believed in God. There were no atheists who signed the Constitution or the Declaration.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Right, and one of the problems we have today with the Constitution is, I believe you were talking about youth,
Yes.
is that our schools, and I'm a retired high school teacher, so I am not anti-teacher and not anti-education.
No, I'm not either.
But I believe that we have neglected a classical education where American history and our founding documents and the history of how we came here, I believe, is sadly neglected today in schools.
Yes, and if you don't understand the foundation of your nation that provides you with these opportunities and freedoms, and then if you don't understand and appreciate that, then you're not going to stand up to defend them and protect them.
Right.
And then if you get enough people in the country who are not educated about the founding principles of our nation, then eventually nobody will be there to stand up and protect them, and then you lose those rights and opportunities. And this country's unique.
Right. Today in school, for example, now I know they probably do in advanced placement courses. I haven't been teaching now for 8 or 10 years, so I can't really say. But do they teach children today in American public schools how America was founded? For example, do they teach them that the people in the 16 and 1700s who came over here were fleeing Europe because of religious and political persecution? Mm-hmm. And therefore, one of the things that was very important to the founders was to put freedom of religion in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The First Amendment protects each individual person so that they can enjoy their own individual religious liberty to worship or not worship as they chose. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with limiting the rights of the individual person. It constrains government. Government, there's a very high impenetrable wall between, or there's supposed to be anyway, between the right of an individual person who lives in the United States of America to worship God in the manner they choose, or not to worship at all, and the government can't take sides. They have to stay out of it. It was never the intention of the Constitution to put in separation of church and state. Those words are not in the Constitution at all. What has happened is liberal courts have read them into the Constitution for their own purposes, and they've legislated from the bench. The words are not in the document. That is not what they intended. And if you read the Federalist Papers or any of the 600 pages, I think, or more of notes that were taken during the debates at the Constitutional Convention.
Madison took the notes.
Our founding fathers were very adamant about what they meant and the protections that they wrote into that document.
Well, and for good reason, because they came, some of them from Great Britain, where King George III was a tyrant. There was a government church, and you didn't have the right to what's the word I want? Experience your own religion. And that's one of the things that drove them out.
Right. The Constitution meant, again, contrary to modern jurisprudence, which says it means that there's separation of church and state, it's not what it meant. It simply meant that the United States government would never establish a state church like the Anglican Church in England was the state church, or in a country like, let's say, Sweden. I'm not sure this is accurate, but I think their state church was Lutheran.
I don't know.
I can be corrected on that, but a number of European countries, and certainly Spain was Catholic. That was their official state church, I believe. So many European countries had an official state church. The United States was not to have one. But the founders, most of whom were practicing Christians, were very clear that the individual had the right to religious freedom. The government could never tell the individual to shut up, to go away, to not talk about God in the public square, and that religion should have no influence in the public square. They never meant that whatsoever.
When I was a youngster, many moons ago, and in, let's say, elementary school, we said the Lord's Prayer every morning in school, and then we said the pledge to the American flag. And there was such a feeling of patriotism there would be bands that would play patriotic music at every event, just about, and every holiday. And it was so exciting, and it just built up this wonderful patriotic feeling within you, pride in your country. And that's what I grew up with.
Right.
And I so miss hearing that John
Philip Sousa? Yeah.
music and so forth. That's why I love to go to West Point and watch the cadets marching on the green, because that music, it just lifts me right up.
Right. Oh, that's such a great lead into this.
Oh, good.
I just read an interesting story online that was put up by the Washington Post, talking about a survey that was done by, I'm looking for the name here, I don't see it right away, but a private organization who surveyed, according to certain criteria, which were the most and least patriotic states in the United States. Okay, and their criteria were as follows. The number of percentage of citizens versus the total population in that particular state of who has enlisted in the military. The percentage of residents who were active, well, not active veterans, who were veterans, retired veterans. The number of active duty military personnel, the percentage of people in the military reserves, civic engagement of a non-military nature, percentage of residents who voted in the last 2 elections, the rate of community volunteerism, volunteerism in AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, if not the military, and the frequency of Google searches for American flags online versus other things, I guess, and what kind of civic education requirements were carried out in the schools. And interesting survey. And the top 10 most patriotic states in the nation, from number 1 to 10, according to this this group, were Virginia, Alaska, South Carolina, Colorado, Georgia, Hawaii, Montana, Alabama, Washington, and New Hampshire. The bottom 5 or 6 states were from number 45 down to number 50. Massachusetts, Illinois, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Vermont ranked 19th. So we're kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Take it for whatever you want to take it for. But I'll tell you one thing that struck me was that 2 of the states that were the most active in writing the Constitution and the American Revolution and service in George Washington's military and patriotic fervor, Virginia and Massachusetts were at opposite ends of that survey.
Really?
Yeah, Virginia number 1, Massachusetts bottom 5.
Interesting.
Wow, that really blew me away.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm just making a comment.
Yeah,
but
well,
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder, I want to touch a little bit on why people came here, and we did a little bit, because they were, you put it really well.
Fleeing from
Yeah, they were.
political and religious persecution.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And can you imagine, it had to be so bad because that they were forced to just vacate their homes, find a way to get across the ocean, bringing just a few of their personal items, and not exactly even knowing what they're going to face when they get here. I mean, what courage. I'm just so in awe of that adventuresome and that desire to make a better life.
Right. Some of the people, actually, not the people who came over, obviously, but some people were martyred in the European countries for not having the correct religion. There was I forget what it is in Latin, I can't quote it, but there was an old Latin saying which basically said in Europe, the religion of the king is the religion of the people.
Oh, well,
Put it in Latin and you've got it.
King
Yeah.
George was a tyrant, and it was his way or the highway.
Right.
That's the way I put it.
But it wasn't just the Anglican Church. It was a number of different Catholic and Protestant denominations that had the same rule. Whatever the sovereign's religion was, that's what yours was.
And by 1775, in this country, that was the start of the Revolutionary War, and which lasted for 8 years, by the way. And these people had muskets, and they were fighting this grand army of King George III, who wanted to continue to control them even though they were in a different nation. He wanted to continue to tax them and have his military in their homes staying, if they needed housing. And they were fighting for their lives and for their freedom.
Right.
And I can't believe what they did against this grand army, and yet they won. It's just, I think God was with them.
I was just going to say that, since, especially if you read the Declaration of Independence, they were unashamedly Judeo-Christian in their principles. Mm-hmm. They were not atheists, they were not socialists, they were not, pagans. They called, as a matter of fact, there was a flag in the American Revolution which had a pine tree on it. It was on a white background with a big spreading green-leafed, bowed, pine tree. And over the top it said, "An appeal to heaven." That was one of the flags they carried in the American Revolution because they believed not just that they had a revolution, but that they had a divine right, so to speak, to free themselves from tyrannical oppression. Mm-hmm. That liberty and freedom in the human soul, which is an inalienable right, which existed before government existed, mm-hmm. was their birthright, so to speak, and they had the right to be free.
Absolutely.
And it's not just Americans who feel that way. People all over the world feel that way. Look at all the people that are trying to come here to get that freedom and liberty because they don't experience it under their own governments in their own homeland.
Yeah, it's really sad. But I didn't put things together until I was writing down the dates. And it was only a year after the start of the Revolutionary War in 1775 that the Declaration of Independence was written by Jefferson, just 1 year into an 8-year war. That kind of took me by surprise.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing that's interesting about that is if you compare what happened here to the French Revolution, which took place just about the time that our Constitution was ratified, you can see the difference between a revolution where the people were Judeo-Christian in their principles and a revolution where there was not that element involved. There were two men that were very influential in the two revolutions, Montesquieu and I think it was, let's see.
Lafayette.
No, I want to get it right here. Okay. I wrote it down if I can't find it.
There's the school teacher.
Yeah, I know.
Roll the
It's
notes.
terrible. Might have been Rousseau,
Okay.
actually. I believe they were both Frenchmen. Anyway, one said, Montesquieu, I think it was, or Montague, I forget how you pronounce it. His principles were faithfulness to God, not that he was advocating a particular religion, but Judeo-Christian, morals, and that the revolution should be conducted insofar as possible, on sort of godly principles, and he was in favor of the individual and freedom and a limited government, and those principles of his were what actually kind of guided our revolution. Mm-hmm. But Rousseau, on the other hand, was not he was more of a religion-free revolutionist, and he believed that government should have the power. And the French Revolution did some things, and there were bloodbaths in that we never had here because of the philosophical differences of the leaders of both revolutions.
Yeah, well, one thing for sure is that the people who came here in the early years of our country definitely wanted to make sure that above all else they had freedom. And I think they did a wonderful job of putting together a document with the Bill of Rights as well. By the way, things that I've learned along the way, the Constitution was ratified by the delegates from I think there were only 10 of the states. Rhode Island, or I think it was.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of
did not
states that-
participate,
right.
but there were 10. Were there 10?
Well, we had 13 colonies,
Yeah,
so we were all represented.
Yeah, so one was not, and I believe it was Rhode Island, didn't participate in the Constitution debate and all that. But in 1787 is the year that the delegates to the convention ratified the Constitution. And then 2 years later, in 1789, the citizens at large voted to ratify the Constitution. And then 2 years after that, in 1791, the Bill of Rights was written because James Madison contacted Thomas Jefferson, who was an ambassador, if you will, to France. And he said, you know what? We've created this document, but there's nothing in it that identifies rights of the individual. And that bothers me. So they got together and came up with the Bill of Rights, thankfully,
Yeah.
in 1791.
Now, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe they actually discussed a possible Bill of Rights during the constitutional conventions, but you had the two sides, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and one was led by Alexander Hamilton, and the other one was led by, I think, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. And Alexander Hamilton wanted a strong central government,
Right.
and really weak states, and the other side wanted just the opposite, a weak federal government and strong states. And while they were able to agree on the Constitution, they were not able to agree on the Bill of Rights. And so it was holding up, that was one of the reasons, there was a couple of them, but one of the reasons that was holding up the ratification of the Constitution. And so I forget which side demanded the Bill of Rights, but the other side said, look, if you ratify the Constitution, we promise you that once the Constitution is ratified, we will then get together and we will work on a Bill of Rights and we will eventually ratify it. And so now think about that. That's 240 some odd years ago when a man's word was his bond and you settled things with a handshake. Can you imagine a major piece of legislation today in our Congress passing when you have the Republicans and the Democrats at odds with each other, and one side saying to the other, oh, well, if you just pass this, we promise you that after it's passed, we will give you the other part of what you want. But that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, well, they trusted, didn't they?
Yeah, they trusted each other, and that is, in fact, so what you're correct, it was 2 years afterward, I believe,
Yes.
when they passed the Bill of Rights.
1791.
Thank goodness we have it. The side that didn't think we needed it said, look, the Constitution is self-evident. We have inalienable rights. Everybody knows we have these rights. They exist because God gave them to us before government.
Life,
Why do we
liberty.
need to enumerate them?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not the guarantee of happiness, folks. The pursuit of happiness.
Right, and they actually said that they thought, the side that was against it said, They didn't want to have it listed because they thought enumerating rights would mean that they would forget other rights.
Yes,
But the 9th and 10th Amendments took care of that problem.
that's right.
So those are critically important. Without the 9th and 10th Amendments, there probably would not have been a Bill of Rights.
Well, it is important.
Read the 9th and 10th Amendments.
The Ninth Amendment to the Constitution. Constitution does not list all individual rights. The enumeration or the listing in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the public.
Correct.
And, yeah, and the powers, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, the powers not delegated to the United States, to the states, in other words, by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, those powers are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I kind of reworded it there, but it's,
Right.
it's the same. It's the same message.
Right. In other words, all those rights, the 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights are not exclusive, meaning just because something's not mentioned doesn't mean we as citizens don't have that right. If you buy inalienable rights, if you buy the concept that human beings' rights existed before a government, before a constitution, and that they come from God.
You have a right to exist.
Correct. You have a right to, as you said, life,
Liberty.
property,
Yeah.
and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, property was one that they...
Oh, that was a big one.
Yeah, they fought over.
Right.
Well, and there are efforts today by, I don't want to get deeply into this,
Right.
by the United Nations wanting to, through environmental maneuvering, want to control the private property of people in the United States and elsewhere. And that's why we have to understand our rights, folks, so that we don't let an international organization like the United Nations take away our rights to our property. And they have something called WOTUS, Waters of the United States, and the United Nations wants to control all of the waters in our country, even a stream that goes through your property. This is scary stuff. And that's another reason why we all have to be highly educated and informed about what our Constitution is, what our rights are as Americans, what our responsibilities are as Americans, because rights without responsibilities can be a problem. We have a duty as citizens to know what the Constitution says and to work with it and to respect it and to do our part as American citizens.
The great French historian, Alexis de Tocqueville, who came over here
Yes.
After the American Revolution. He had gone through the Napoleonic era, and he came over here, and he was interested in studying America to see what kind of experiment we were making and how it was turning out. And he said, America is great because America is good, meaning morally good. That's what he meant. And he also said, if America ever ceases to become, or being good, then we will cease being great.
I believe that.
And John Adams said that our Constitution was made only for a religious and moral people, and it was wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. And even Benjamin Franklin, who was not Christian, he was a deist, I believe, he said, only a virtuous people are capable of real freedom, and as nations become more corrupt and vicious, then they have need of a master.
Look what's happening today. People, I mean, the uprisings that I believe are all coordinated and planned, but the distrust and the anger and the I don't know what the Me Too movement is. Do you know? I keep
think
hearing,
isn't that the women who were sexually molested by bosses and Hollywood producers?
I have no idea.
And they're telling their stories, and that's Me Too. In other words, more people are coming out and saying what happened, like with
don't
Harvey
know.
Weinstein.
I guess I did.
I believe, I could be wrong. Okay, I don't follow it closely, but I believe that's what that
Okay.
is.
I'm sorry I even brought it up.
Well, I want to mention some points that I jotted down when I was doing
Sure.
my reading and research. And again, I'm talking about everybody in the world, really, but I'm going to focus on the United States of America under the current Constitution and government we have, because I can't control anybody else, okay?
You can't control anybody.
Well, that's true. I can't even control myself. So. All right. I definitely am what you would call an originalist. I believe that the Constitution meant something when the founders wrote it.
Oh.
It is amply documented in the Federalist Papers and the notes taken during the constitutional conventions. Mm-hmm. It's a document that was sweated and slaved over for months and months and months
over.
by 13 colonies and their representatives. It was argued, debated, and hashed out, and finally ratified and signed. Mm-hmm. It says what it says, it means what it means, and I really disagree with liberal judges who try to impose their own interpretation upon it.
Me too.
Okay, and if you believe in an originalist interpretation of the Constitution, again, it was definitely influenced by Judeo-Christian principles, although it's not a Christian document per se.
Right.
Okay. But as a United States citizen under this Constitution, I found that a lot of the people that I was reading believe the following: that we people are made in the image of God, number one. Number two, we the people have inalienable rights that no government can take away, because they're not given to us by a government, they're given to us by God. Without God, you have no inalienable rights. You have the rule of man and the law of man. You don't have an overarching supreme law. Number three, liberty is the right of every human being on the planet, regardless of the country they come from or the government they have currently.
Well,
And number four, the last one, the best government enjoys, now this is planet-wide, okay, the best government enjoys rule of law under a limited government structure, where the individual has freedom. And the best government will always maintain a delicate balance between law and liberty.
well, that's good stuff. And
Not my ideas,
No,
original ideas,
that you
stuff that I've
shared.
read. Yeah.
And it falls right in line with this, I think. Robert F. Kennedy, whom you probably know was assassinated a number of years ago, Robert F. Kennedy stated, quote, "The problem of power is how to achieve its responsible use rather than its irresponsible and indulgent use, or of how to get men of power to live for the public rather than off the public." And just another couple of quotes here. In the words of Edmund Burke, I love this.
Oh yeah, Edmund Burke is good.
This is one of my favorite quotes. "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men and women do nothing."
There is a movement today in our country, I call it socialism, to say that we must have equality of outcome.
No.
No, the Constitution provides equality of opportunity. Now, we don't do it perfectly, we don't do it 100%, but that's what the principles of it are, that every person in this country has equal opportunity, but it never guarantees equal outcome. Socialism and communism try to say we'll have equal outcome, but that always leads to tyranny.
I believe that we are equal in the eyes of God and under the law.
Right.
Other than that, we're all different. Some are tall, some are short, some are, interested in technology, some want to be artists. I mean, we're all different, and yet we're all the same under the law and in the eyes of God. But equality, I get so mystified by people who are whining about equality. Some people go to school for 16 years and they work their fannies off and they become very successful and make a lot of money. Some of them are great about sharing it with people in need or organizations that help people. But it's not a bad thing to become wealthy.
Right.
If you've worked for it and earned it, you deserve it, or somebody worked for it and gave it to you, but we all have a choice to, what I said to the 7th and 8th graders when I spoke to them? There's a big world out there waiting for you. Your job is to prepare yourself for it. And that means work hard. You have a job. Right now, you have a job. And your job is to be a sponge for knowledge, to learn everything you can today. That is a building block. What you learn today is a building block for what you're taught tomorrow. And eventually, you'll have a platform or a foundation for your life. I can't do it for you. Your teacher can't do it for you. That's your job. And I would say the same thing to, people who are out of school. If you're not applying yourself and trying to better yourself, then so be it.
What you said was really interesting because you are mirroring kind of a quote that I just happened to have written down here from Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
And he said, it is to be regretted that the rich and powerful, he's talking about in government and working with government, it is to be regretted that the rich and powerful can bend the wheels of government to their own purposes. Distinctions in society, however, will always exist if you allow equal freedom and equal opportunity. Nevertheless, some people will always be more talented than others. Some will read better, some will spell better, some will sing better. Equality of talents and intellect don't exist. Inequality of talents and intellect will always exist and cannot be made equal by an edict of government of men. That is not what equality means.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That gives the whole entire lie, it seems to me, to communism and socialism, where they promise that everybody will be equal. To me, that's utopian thinking, and utopias never work.
Paid education for everybody. Are you kidding me? You know what? Because of human nature, is if everything is given to you, your ability to really be grateful and appreciative of what you have, I think is much less than when you have to, work for 4 years in college and, not be a partier all the time. I had a roommate that never missed a party when we were freshmen at UVM. While I was in my room with my nose in a book, trying to learn. She was out partying. She didn't last in school very long, but I guess she had a good time.
Yeah.
So it's, it's the choices we make. We have choices. We have opportunities. I wanted to just add this quote. Let me see. Our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, stated, "The people are the masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who would pervert it." And this again goes right back to the power we have as individuals. And I talk to a lot of people, and many folks are very distraught about what some of the things that are going on in our country, the uprisings and the dissatisfactions and all of that and much more. And I say, so what are we doing about it? Some people don't like what's in our schools. And I say, well, what are you doing about it? Who's speaking up? Nobody. So nothing will change. If we don't stand up for the things that we believe are right and just and important to the future of our land and the future of our youth. I care very much about the future citizens of this country. They are the ones who have the future of our country in their hands. And if they are not educated to understand their rights and their responsibilities and the laws that protect them and provide for a strong nation, if they follow through and make sure that they speak out and stand up.
Education of the next generation is one of the failure to do so, or the neglect of it, is one of the reasons societies and cultures fall. I was reading, and this is kind of self-evident, we've discussed this on this show before. We've talked about Alexander Fraser Tytler and his rise and fall of nations cycle, but nations always rise and fall in cycles, and that is just as true for America as any other nation. With this particular knowledge and all of the lessons of past history so readily available with our contemporary culture and means of communication and knowledge that we have, why are we allowing ourselves to follow the same cycle? And we are. This country is following that cycle. And 4 of the big reasons for a culture declining in general are, number 1, corrupt and venal, power-hungry leaders. Number 2, neglect of educating the next generation in the morals and traditions that made the former civilization great. Or in the case of America, neglecting the classical education and history of the past and replacing it with politically correct indoctrination. Number 3, soft and pleasure-loving adult citizens who have become too lazy and indifferent and unwilling to sacrifice. And number 4, tolerance of more and more encroachments on our freedoms by more and more centralized government.
We have to fight hard against that. We have a lot to cover here, but since we got on a little bit of education here, I 2 quick quotes. Vladimir Lenin, the first leader of the Soviet Union, said this, quote, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." He was the head of the government, okay? And then the father of communism, Karl Marx. "The education of all children, from the moment they can get along without a mother's care, shall be in state institutions at state expense." That's the way government controls the minds of the young people. Unless we stand up, I don't know who's, if parents are hopefully paying attention, that would be great.
That's actually one of the platforms of the Communist Party, is to remove children from the influence of their parents and the church, and for the state to take over their education.
Well, now we have
Yeah.
preschool that they've added to, to the schools, pre-K.
Right. The writers of the Constitution were not anti-public education, but the public education was supposed to be done at the state and local levels. The power over education is not an enumerated power of the federal government under Article 1, Section 8 in the United States Constitution.
That is right.
Unlike European countries, many of them, where it is,
Yep.
or communist bloc countries. Ours is not. Ours has the separation of powers. The federal government has certain enumerated powers, the states have, and then all the rest of the powers belong to the people.
And the enumerated powers of the federal government do not include, as you said, education.
That's correct.
Nor health care.
Correct.
Those are not roles for the federal government.
Right.
Those are roles for the state. And if the congressmen and the leaders in government looked at the Constitution, they would see that the roles that they have taken on are not in the Constitution.
If you ask the two questions, number one, who is sovereign? And number two, what is the role, the legitimate role of a legitimate government? And you ask those questions under our Constitution or under a socialist constitution, you will get completely different answers.
Mm-hmm. Well, socialism is not something, I mean, we have a senator who's a Democratic socialist.
Yeah.
What about the difference between a democracy and a republic? A lot of people, I keep hearing, oh, we're a democracy, we're a democracy. Well, we are partially a democracy in that the people have an opportunity to vote. In a democracy, that's the case. The people have a chance to vote. However, once the vote is done, whoever won takes charge. Okay? The men, rule by men. In a republic, a democratic constitutional republic, which our nation is, yes, we're a democracy in that the people have an opportunity to vote. But once the vote is done, then there's a structure, there's a constitution that controls what can be done and what cannot be done.
Right.
So it's rule by law versus in a pure democracy, rule by the whims of men.
Right,
Because-
and the majority of men. In other words, with no constitution and no republic, if you just had a pure democracy like Athens, for example, 51% of the population could always run roughshod over the other 49%. And they could change the law every year
Because they didn't
to
have-
make exactly the opposite meaning if,
No
if
constitution.
they so voted. Right, but in our Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. Doesn't mean the Republican Party.
Right.
It means constitutional republic, completely different form of government than a democracy, which, by the way, is one of the reasons we have an electoral college. And during the last election, when Hillary lost, and her followers were screaming, we need the popular vote, we need the popular vote. Well, we would have that if we were a pure democracy, but we're not. We have the Electoral College because we are a constitutional republic, and we do have a popular vote, say in a presidential election, but it's state by state. It is not one mass amorphous entity like France or Spain or England. We are a confederation of 50 separate states. That is why we have an electoral college. And that debate, by the way, for anyone that cares to know, whether we should have a direct popular vote or an electoral college was completely hashed out during the Constitutional Convention.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And there was a huge fight over it.
The big states versus the small states.
And the people who wanted direct popular vote and the people who wanted no popular vote whatsoever, even with an electoral college. The electoral college was a compromise. There was the faction that wanted the elected senators and representatives to appoint the president, and then there was the faction who wanted complete, popular vote. And they were like, now wait a minute, one is anarchy, one is despotism. We have to have a compromise because, again, our structure is different. This country is really different. We have 50 states.
Yeah.
Now, back then we had 13 colonies that became states. But that's why the Electoral College came into being. It was a compromise so that you had aspects of the democracy and aspects of the republic.
And it was the big states versus the small states, because the small states wouldn't have, their votes wouldn't amount to a hill of beans.
Correct.
If just like in this country, you have the east and west, big
coastlines.
The coastlines.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you have all the middle, flyover country.
Right, right. And the highly populated states, if it were just a popular vote
Right.
without the electoral college, then the people wouldn't have a chance.
Right.
In the small states,
Right.
they might as well not vote.
Now, people can say to us, but that's how they do it in France or Spain, and they have rural and city. Yes, but France and Spain don't have states like we do.
That's true.
what people have to remember. The
We need
United States,
representation.
we are very different from every other country because of the way the founding fathers wrote the Constitution. Right, we have states, and there's supposed to be a balance of power, the federal government and the states. And so people elect the president with a combination of democracy and republic in mind, and that's the Electoral College.
And we're down to just 3 minutes, but I just found this. A republic, which is what our country is fragile because it relies on we the people to understand and respect a set of values and laws. It requires us to elect people of virtue and good character. It requires that our elected representatives abide by their oath to protect and defend the Constitution. It requires, requires that children of every decade be well educated on the fundamentals of a free society, and the responsibility of every citizen to participate and stand up for our constitutional protections. If neglected, our republic can deteriorate into lesser forms. It requires us to be a nation of moral, respectful, vigilant, responsible, informed, and involved citizens. That is what it takes to preserve our freedom and rights. How many of us are assuming that responsibility?
We are the first and only constitutional republic in the world ever in history that was founded on the kind of constitution we have and on the rights of the individual under the rule of law and limited government, and not on the rule of men or a despot or a tyrant or a monarch.
Perfect. What a great way to end the show. Kay, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
I'm going to have a minute now to just thank the viewers for checking in here, and I want to remind you about the Liberty Camp. Give me a call, 527-7220, if you have a child who would be interested in learning about the fundamentals of our country. With that, I want to say thank you and good night. Have a good week, and I'll be back with you then. Good night.